Alright, so in this video we're checking out the Foxeer Apollo DJI FPV camera. So this is another micro FPV camera for the DJI FPV system. There's now several more coming out from Foxeer and RunCam. I think I tested the MIPI camera from before. I don't know if they're still making that. There's some other new ones from RunCam, like the Phoenix and some other ones that I don't have yet. And well, let me know in the comments below if you want me to test those or not. I'm not really that interested in testing those. I'm basically noticing that there's not a lot of differences between these newer cameras and the ones from Caddx. Basically, it comes down to firmware differences in how their sensors work and how the colors rendered and stuff. And so it really comes down to things like image quality preferences and whether or not you like the lens, that kind of thing. I'll get into all that here in this video. But anyway, let me just tell you a little bit more about the camera itself. So this is the one with the regular lens, micro-sized. They don't have a nano-sized one yet for DJI. And it's a pretty big lens. You know, if you look at this, you know, it's similar in size to the Polar. It kind of sticks out. In fact, this is where the Caddx Polar camera sort of came out of. It's a little bit shorter in terms of the nose length than the Polar camera, but it's got a similar sized lens. And if you look at the lens itself, it's very similar looking. Not 100% sure if it's exactly the same glass or whatnot, but you just look at the lens. It looks really, really similar. Obviously, the lens ring is different. They are using a different sensor in this one. They're saying it's about a 1/2 inch sensor. It is a 16:9 sensor, not a 4:3. It is a 60 FPS camera, not a 120 FPS camera. So I already know that there's probably guys that have rushed down in the comments and have clicked off the video already, and they've put their comments saying, don't buy a 60 FPS camera. Why are the people still making a 60 FPS cameras, etc., etc.? I don't know, there's all sorts of hate on these 60 FPS cameras, and I'm not really sure why people that only love the 120 FPS cameras would want to click on a video about a 60 FPS camera to leave a comment about that they don't like the 60 FPS cameras. Anyway, I'm pretty sure they're going to be doing that. And, you know, for those people that are wanting the ultimate latency or whatever for because everyone's a professional racer, of course, and in the top 5 in the world, they're going to have the 120 FPS camera, of course. But for the rest of us that are just normal casual flyers and maybe a little bit of freestyle, 60 FPS is fine. I have no problem with the latency personally. I feel like I can fly normally and not have any issues, but you know, I fly 60 FPS, or actually I fly high quality mode, not low latency mode. And yeah, I fly high quality mode pretty much all the time with out focus mode on my DJI camera, so I'm used to the higher latency of these cameras anyway. I think if I flew like the Nebula Pro or the Nebula Pro Nano or the DJI camera, you know, those three 120 FPS cameras, if I flew those pretty much all the time and got used to the lower latency, then yeah, I would probably hate flying the higher latency cameras. So really kind of depends on what you're used to, when you can, you know, sort of adjust yourself in terms of your flying. Now, in terms of the this camera itself, you know, it's a micro-sized camera like the Caddx Polar, 19 millimeters across. The weight's a little bit less. It's about 8.4 grams, and the Polar's about 8.9 grams. So the Polar's a little bit heavier. In terms of the field of view of the cameras, they are fairly similar in my opinion. Now, I actually I'll show you here a little comparison between this camera, the Apollo, versus the field of view on the Polar Nano camera. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm going to compare, basically I'm going to talk about this in terms of the low light performance and compare this to the Nano, because that smaller lens has got similar performance to this Apollo version. And I don't have the Starlight version with the, I guess it's got a bigger aperture lens. It's a different lens than this one here. and that one's got supposedly a little bit better low light performance than the standard lens, but I don't have that version. And I don't plan on testing it or requiring it. So if you're asking me to test that, I've already seen from some other videos, I can tell you that the difference in nighttime performance or low light performance isn't that huge between the standard version and the Starlight version. You get a little bit better low light performance, but it's not a huge difference. If you are looking for much better low light performance out of a DJI FPV camera, the standard Caddx Polar camera, in my opinion, is still the best. It still gives you the best low light performance out of all the cameras. So if that's what you're looking for, if that's your goal, then get the Polar. The Polar Nano is pretty similar to the Apollo standard lens. So if you want a comparison that way. Anyway, comparing the field of view of the Apollo standard lens versus the Polar Nano lens, they're pretty similar. You might see some slight differences in the vertical field of view. But I think what you see a little bit more in this lens is a slight bit more distortion in the far corners. It's not that much different. There's still a fair amount of distortion on the Caddx lenses as well. The biggest thing that I've noticed on this sensor, and I think it is a slightly different sensor, is maybe the white balance. And it could be that they're using a similar sensor, or maybe they are using the same sensor, but they've tweaked their firmware where the color balance or the white balance is different. So on the Polar cameras, they're kind of more leaning towards like the browns and the yellows in the image, quite a bit warmer in that sense. It's like, but the Apollo camera seems to have more shifted in the red area. So you get sort of this like red lens flare occasionally when you're flying into the sun. It's a little bit distracting. But overall, when you're looking at the image, like just like the ground and the trees, everything just sort of, you look at the color or the white balance, it's sort of leaning into the red area. So you may or may not like that. I personally, myself, I prefer colder colors, like more in the blue. And that's why I kind of prefer the Nebula Pro or the Nebula Nano or Nebula Pro Nano. Those have much colder images and less action camera looking, so it doesn't look like an action camera, whereas the Apollo camera is going to look more like it looks more like GoPro footage, like it's in terms of the saturation and the white balance. That's in my opinion on that. So if you're more into that, if you're looking like, oh, this looks more realistic, again, this is very subjective, then yeah, maybe the Apollo might be a better camera for you. In terms of the image quality, it's the same, in my opinion, as all of the other DJI cameras. 60 frames per second. The output of the image is 720p when you're recording on a Vista, or 1080p on the DJI Air unit. It's no different than any other camera that is using the DJI system. So really the main differences come down to the lens, the sensor, and the firmware. And so each of these vendors, whether it's Foxeer, Caddx, or RunCam, they're just making little tweaks to the firmware and maybe some different choices in their lens to give a slightly different image. And whether you like it or not, really kind of depends on your personal taste and it's very subjective. So, you can look at this footage, you can look at some of my older videos on the other cameras that I've already reviewed, and sort of, I fly these all at the same place, or at least I try to, so you can get an idea whether you like some of the cameras that have come out before, or whether you like this image better. This is, of course, assuming that you are okay with flying the 60 FPS cameras, of course. Otherwise, I don't know why you're still watching this video. Go buy the Nebula Pro or the Nebula Pro Nano or the original DJI camera. Okay, that's going to do it for this video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Talk to you guys in the next one.